The stars over Kree space pulsed like dying embers, cold and ancient. Deep within the abandoned vault world of Sharnus 9, shadows crawled across cracked marble and whispering metal. The place reeked of something long dead. But Peter Parker knew better than to trust silence in deep space. He perched on a ledge inside the ruined central chamber, masked, tense, his fingers twitching against the cold grip of his web shooters. The mission was simple: extract Stark's stolen tech, get out, and don't die. Simple never lasted long. That's when the sound came, barely a breath, a flicker, a ripple in the dark. And then she stepped into view. Her cloak shimmered like liquid void, melting into the shadows that danced around her. Her eyes glowed faint purple, ancient and sharp. There was grace in the way she moved, but not fragility. No, it was the coiled stillness of a storm just before the lightning strikes. Peter's breath caught. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her presence screamed danger louder than any words could. She held something in her hand, Stark's chronosplit drive, still glowing red. He dropped to the floor with a soft thud, keeping his posture low and his tone light. Hey, you're either really lost or really stealing something very important. The girl tilted her head. And you're either very brave or very stupid. The voice was soft, but beneath it was a hum, a weight that settled in the bones. Peter's heart pounded. He'd faced gods, aliens, multiversal nightmares, but there was something about her, familiar and unknown, beautiful and lethal, like fire under glass. He took a cautious step forward. Name's Spiderman. You got a name, or do you prefer cryptic glares? Nex. It fell from her lips like a secret broken open. Then the walls trembled. A pulse of energy shook the vault, and an overhead crack tore open in the ceiling. Light from a fractured star flooded the chamber. Too bright, too close. Time collapse, Peter shouted. The chronosplit's unstable. Nex's eyes widened. Without thinking, he launched a web, yanking her into his arms as the floor dropped from under them. A shockwave hit, and suddenly the world slowed, stretched, froze. The vault dissolved around them like dust in rivers. They floated, suspended in a glowing time bubble, weightless in a sea of collapsed seconds. Everything outside moved like molasses. But inside, time burned fast. Seconds turned to minutes, minutes to hours. They stood inches apart, suspended in amber light, reality curling around them like smoke. Peter didn't let go. She didn't ask him to. Nyx looked up at him, her voice a whisper through the time static. You should have left me. You didn't seem like you wanted to be left, he said, his voice gentler than he meant it to be. Her eyes searched his. He couldn't look away. Every second in this broken bubble stretched them closer. Her mask of steel cracked, just slightly. The daughter of Thanos. The ghost of a god's war. And Peter. Just a boy who'd seen too much and still chose to hope. I don't want to be what he made me, she said. I don't think you are. Around them, the time field pulsed brighter. The vault would return soon, and with it, the consequences. But in that stolen moment, wrapped in flickering light and breathless silence, nothing else existed. Only them. And a choice neither of them would be able to unmake. The return to reality was a violent one. The rift closed with a snap, the time bubble collapsing in on itself as if it had never existed. The floor of the Kree vault slammed back into place, the walls crumbling as the echoes of their moment faded like dust. Peter stumbled, catching his breath. His heart hammered against his ribs. He could still feel the weight of Nyx's presence, the way her breath had mingled with his in that fleeting, impossible space. It was all he could hold on to in the chaos. Nyx stood across from him, her stance like a warrior ready for battle, her eyes scanning the room, alert and calculating. Her hand was still gripping the stolen chronosplit drive, but now it seemed to pulse with a more dangerous energy, as if it had tasted something dangerous inside her. They were not alone. The sudden hum of engines echoed from outside the vault, growing louder. The Kree were coming, faster than Peter had anticipated. He could already hear the soft click of boots against metal, the sound of their footsteps reverberating in the narrow corridors. "Listen to me," Peter said, his voice low and urgent. "We don't have much time. If we don't move, we're both dead." Nyx didn't flinch. She didn't even look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the shattered doorway. And then, like a shadow, she disappeared, blending into the dark, moving with impossible speed. Peter cursed under his breath. Of course, she could move like that. She wasn't just any rogue thief. She was something else entirely. He followed, shooting a web to the ceiling and swinging into the shadows. He found her a few moments later, crouched at the edge of the ruined corridor, listening. "They'll be here in seconds," she said, her voice tight, but controlled. "You're in over your head, Spider-Man." Peter winced at the truth in her words. He was in over his head. But he wasn't about to back down now. Not after what they'd shared. Not after the way she'd looked at him in the time bubble, as if something inside her was unraveling. Something real. Something worth saving. "I don't need you to tell me what I'm doing," he shot back, his voice stronger than he felt. "You're not the only one with something to lose." She turned her head slowly, her eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before he could answer, the distant thud of boots drew closer. The Kree were here. Nyx pushed off the wall, and Peter followed, webs snapping and twisting around the ruined metal structures, his heart still racing. But it wasn't just the Kree he was running from anymore. It was her. The weight of their brief connection lingered, gnawing at him, pulling him in ways he didn't understand. Was she an ally? Or was he just another pawn in some cosmic game that would destroy him the moment he let his guard down? They reached the edge of the vault, but Nyx wasn't slowing down. She ran faster, more desperate now, as if she had a place to be, a secret that Peter had no right to know. But the Kree weren't far behind. Peter's webs lashed out, pulling them through the crumbling halls, his eyes always on her, always watching the way her form blurred between the shadows. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice strained. She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze flickered over her shoulder, the faintest flash of something human in her eyes. "Something broken. You don't want to know." The ground rumbled beneath them. The Kree forces were closing in, and Peter's pulse surged with each step they took. He knew she had a plan. But he also knew something darker was coming, and he was walking straight into it, heart first, with no way of seeing what lay ahead. One thing was certain. The world was about to change. For both of them. The world around them was on the verge of collapse. The moment Nyx broke through the last line of Kree resistance, Peter swung out ahead of her, his webs splintering the fractured walls of the vault. But his mind was miles away, tangled in the dangerous pull she had on him. Nyx moved like a ghost, swift and silent, but there was something in her eyes that screamed urgency, a desperate kind of urgency. They ran together, breathless, through the narrow corridors, twisting through a maze of half-destroyed tech and forgotten machinery. Behind them, the sound of approaching Kree soldiers echoed, heavy boots thumping the floor, the sharp clicks of weapons priming for a fight. They wouldn't be able to outrun them forever. Peter's mind raced. He had no idea where they were headed, no plan beyond putting distance between them and the Kree. But Nyx, she seemed to know exactly what she was doing. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the surroundings, her fingers tightening around the chronosplit drive as if it was her lifeline. He glanced over, his voice barely a whisper. "Where are we going? You're not exactly slowing down." Nyx didn't answer at first. Her expression remained cold, distant. But then, just as they turned a sharp corner and into another crumbling hall, she stopped. Her gaze locked onto something ahead, a shattered piece of technology glowing faintly, nestled against the far wall. "The rift," she said, almost to herself. "It's my only way out." Peter's stomach dropped. "What do you mean, your only way out?" Without a word, She approached the fractured device, her hands moving quickly over its broken surface, as if reconnecting it from memory. The air crackled with strange energy. The device hummed, its faint glow intensifying as sparks began to fly. Peter felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Is that safe?" "No," she replied curtly. "But it's the only chance we have." Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness. The Kree had caught up, the loud clank of their boots echoing through the hall. Peter's heart thudded in his chest. There was no more time for questions. He sprinted toward Nyx, a web snapping out behind him to keep the ceiling from caving in. He reached her just as the first beam of Kree gunfire pierced the air. "Now," she shouted. Peter leaped into action, pulling Nyx into the rift with him, his webbing tangled in her cloak. The world around them twisted violently as the rift tore through reality itself. Everything blurred, spaces and times colliding. Seconds stretched until they were no longer seconds at all. The sensation was dizzying, sickening, like falling but never hitting the ground. They landed with a crash, the world snapping back into focus around them. The sudden weightlessness was replaced by the steady thrum of gravity, but the ground beneath them was no longer the cold metal of Charnus 9. It was something softer, dirt, grass, and something ancient. Peter's breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed himself to his feet, eyes wide in disbelief. They were no longer on the Kree ship. They were on a world far away. The sky above them was a muted red, dotted with distant stars. A fractured sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the craggy landscape. "I don't understand," Peter muttered, his voice hoarse. "Where are we?" Nyx didn't answer right away. She was already scanning the horizon, her face unreadable, as if bracing for something. The rift closed behind them, a violent pulse of energy sealing the way back. "This is the edge of the galaxy," she said quietly, "a place the Kree can't follow." For now, Peter's chest tightened. It didn't make sense. Nothing did. What happens now? Nyx turned toward him, her eyes darker than before, heavy with secrets. "Now we survive. Together, or not at all." The weight of her words settled in the air between them. As they stood there, in the silence of this unknown world, Peter realized something that sent a shiver down his spine. Whatever they were running from, whatever their future held, it wasn't just the Kree that threatened them. It was something much deeper, something he couldn't yet see. But he could feel it, and it was pulling them both towards something they couldn't escape. The world around them was alien, unforgiving, and wild. The sky above blood crimson, casting everything beneath it in an eerie, unnatural glow. The ground beneath Peter's boots was jagged and uneven, a landscape forged by ancient forces. Yet the silence here was deafening, broken only by the distant howl of wind through rocks. Peter stood still for a moment, trying to catch his breath, his mind racing. The rift had closed behind them, sealing them off from the Kree, from the universe they knew. But this was worse. They had leaped into the unknown, and with every passing second, the weight of their choice grew heavier. Nyx was a few steps ahead, already moving with purpose. Her silhouette was sharp against the low-hanging sun, the tattered edges of her cloak billowing in the wind. Her face, illuminated by the dim light, was unreadable, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Peter could feel her tension, her hesitation. It mirrored his own. "You didn't have to come," Nyx said without turning to him, her voice low but laced with an edge. "I didn't ask for your help." Peter frowned, but his feet followed her anyway. "You didn't ask for a lot of things," he shot back, his tone biting. "But here I am." Nyx stopped. Her back was still turned, but Peter could see the way her shoulders stiffened. "You don't know what you're doing, Spider-Man." His heart skipped. The sting of her words landed harder than he expected. But he wasn't going to let her shut him out now, not when they were both tangled in this mess. "I know I'm doing the right thing," he replied firmly, "and I'm not going anywhere." She spun around then, her eyes flashing with something that wasn't quite anger, but something close to it. She took a step toward him, her presence powerful, almost suffocating. "You think this is a game," she whispered, her voice like steel. "You think you're the hero here. You don't know me. You don't know what I've done, what I've become." Peter swallowed hard. "I don't care what you've done. I care about who you are now." The words hung in the air, fragile, delicate. For a long moment, neither of them moved, each of them searching the other's face, as if trying to find something they couldn't quite name. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just the space between them, a place where neither of them knew how to bridge the gap. Then, just as Peter opened his mouth to say something, anything, she turned away again. Her pace quickened, and he had no choice but to follow. But the weight of her gaze never left him, even as she walked away. The wind picked up, howling louder now, as if the land itself was warning them. And somewhere far off, barely visible through the haze of red skies and distant mountains, something moved. It was subtle, just a flicker of motion, but it was enough to send a chill down Peter's spine. He pulled his mask tighter around his face, his senses on high alert. "You seeing that?" he asked, his voice quieter now, more cautious. Nyx didn't stop. She didn't even look back. "I'm always seeing things," she said, her voice sharp. "Things that want to kill me." But Peter wasn't convinced. The thing he saw, no, felt, was different. It wasn't just the remnants of the Kree chasing them, or any old enemy they could outrun. This felt bigger. Something was following them. Something ancient. The tension in the air grew thicker, pressing against them as they continued through the barren, twisted landscape. Every step felt heavier, as if the ground itself was pulling them in deeper. The world was alive with strange energy, but it was a deathly kind of life, a kind that wanted to consume them both. Peter's thoughts raced. What was Nyx hiding? What had she gotten herself involved with? Was it more than just the Kree who wanted her dead? They reached the edge of a massive cliff, the jagged rocks falling away into a chasm so deep it swallowed the light. The horizon was a blur of red and black, a broken world, and Peter felt the weight of it all pressed down on him. But as he stood there, looking at Nyx, something else gnawed at him. The lingering question of why he couldn't walk away. Why couldn't he just let go? "I'm not going to let them get you," he said quietly, his voice strained. Nyx didn't respond. She only stared out at the void in front of them, her face unreadable. And in that silence, Peter realized the truth. This was no longer just about survival. This was about a bond between them, fragile and dangerous, born from the shadows and pulled through time. And no matter how much he tried to deny it, he was already caught. They both were. The air shifted, thick with the scent of something ancient. The wind carried whispers, chilling Peter to the bone. He could feel the weight of it. The land, the silence, the overwhelming sensation that they were no longer just fugitives. They were prey. And the hunter wasn't just the Kree. Nyx stood at the edge of the cliff, her back to Peter. She didn't speak, but Peter didn't need words to understand what was happening. Something was closing in on them. The tension in the air, the way the land seemed to shift under their feet. Every sense in his body screamed that they weren't alone. Peter's pulse quickened. "We need to move. Now." Nyx didn't look back. Instead, she took a step forward, her silhouette barely visible against the horizon. The red sun was now a dark orb, hanging dangerously low in the sky, casting long shadows across the jagged terrain. The land was breaking apart, like a world about to die. Yet Nyx remained still, her eyes trained on something beyond the horizon, something Peter couldn't see. "What is it?" he asked, stepping closer. His voice was strained. "What are we waiting for?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "The truth." Peter furrowed his brow, his mind racing. The truth. What did she mean by that? He wanted to reach out, to ask more, but the words caught in his throat. There was something in the way she stood, so resolute, so caught between two worlds, that made him hesitate. This wasn't just about the Kree anymore. Something deeper, something older was pulling at her. He had to know. He couldn't leave her to face it alone. "Nix," Peter said, his voice firm. "I'm not leaving you behind. Not now. Not after everything." She turned slowly, her expression unreadable. For a heartbeat, the world stood still, her gaze meeting his with an intensity that burned. It was as if she were trying to see past the mask, past the bravado, into the heart of him. "You should," she said softly. "It's not just the Kree who want me dead." Peter's heart skipped. The words were like a blow to the chest, but he wasn't afraid. He couldn't be. "Then who?" he asked, stepping closer. "Who else is coming for you, Nix?" For the first time, Nix's mask faltered. The hardened exterior she'd been carrying cracked just slightly, revealing a vulnerability Peter hadn't expected. Her voice was strained when she spoke again, as if the words themselves weighed her down. "The very thing I'm trying to stop," she said, her eyes dark with regret. "The thing I've been running from my whole life. My father's legacy." Peter's mind whirled. Thanos. The thought was a gut punch, a memory he hadn't fully processed until now. Of course, it made sense. She was his daughter. The quiet rage in her eyes, the cold detachment, the fear that danced just beneath the surface. It all pointed back to him. But she wasn't him. Peter swallowed hard. "You're not him, Nix." She looked at him sharply, the air between them crackling with unspoken emotion. "You don't understand. I am him. I am everything he wanted me to be. The destruction, the power, it's in my blood." Her words hung between them, thick with the weight of her past. But Peter didn't back away. Instead, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "Then we fight it," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "We fight it together." Nix's eyes softened, just for a moment, before they hardened again. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. But before either of them could say another word, a low rumble shook the ground. The earth beneath them cracked, and the sound of distant marching filled the air. Clanking, mechanical footsteps, followed by a deep, menacing growl. Peter's heart raced. They didn't have much time. Nix turned away again, her voice cold but tinged with something else. "Get ready, Spider-Man. The Kree aren't the only ones coming for me." Suddenly, the ground split open, and out of the chasm emerged something far worse, something alive. Twisted, monstrous shapes that towered over them, their eyes burning with a hunger that could not be quenched. Peter's webbing shot out instinctively, pulling Nix close to him. "Whatever it is," he said, "we face it together." The creatures roared as they closed in, and Peter felt his heart pounding against his chest. This wasn't a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for their very souls. And he wasn't going to let her face it alone. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and for a moment, Peter thought the world itself was coming undone. The creatures that emerged from the chasm were unlike anything he had ever faced. Their forms were grotesque, monstrous, with jagged spines and glowing eyes that seemed to pierce the very soul. Each step they took caused the earth to crack open, and their growls echoed like a warning. Peter's webbing shot out instinctively, his hands moving with practiced speed, but the creatures were fast, faster than he anticipated. His webs barely grazed one, snapping against its rough hide before recoiling. He barely had time to react before another one lunged toward him with bone-crushing force. "Move," Nix shouted, her voice sharp and urgent. Without thinking, Peter swung upward, the creature's claws narrowly missing his leg. The air around him was thick with tension, his heart racing, but Nix was already ahead of him, moving like a shadow, graceful, precise, lethal. She drew a weapon from her side, a sleek, curved blade that shimmered in the dim light. In a blur of motion, she lunged at the nearest creature, her blade carving through the air with deadly accuracy. The creature roared as she sliced through its arm, blood spraying in all directions. It staggered back, momentarily stunned. Peter's gaze snapped to her. She was so focused, so determined. But something else lingered in her movements, something wild, something unrestrained, as if the fight was the only thing that kept her from unraveling entirely. He shook the thought away and shot another web, pulling himself into the air. He landed on the creature's back, his feet digging into its thick hide. It howled in pain, bucking beneath him, but Peter held on tight, his hands moving quickly as he adjusted his position. "Peter," Nyx yelled from below, her voice laced with warning. "It's not enough. They're too many." She was right. The creatures kept coming, rising from the chasm, crawling up the jagged walls. Their numbers seemed endless, each one more vicious than the last. There was no escape, no way out. But Peter wasn't giving up. Not yet. He shot a web to the nearest rock formation, swinging toward it with all his strength. He landed in a crouch, then shot another web at the ground, pulling himself up just as a creature lunged at him with terrifying speed. He barely dodged, the creature's claws slicing through the air where he'd been a second ago. "Don't let them get close," Nyx shouted as she sprinted past him, her blade flashing in the low light as she sliced through another creature's chest. The air was thick with the stench of blood and smoke, and Peter's mind raced with the urgency of it all. They were being overwhelmed. But then something caught his eye. Movement, a flicker in the distance, another rift. Farther up the cliffside, just beyond the creatures, a faint shimmer rippled in the air. Peter's heart leaped. A way out. He shot a web toward Nyx, pulling her back as a creature closed in on her from behind. "There," he pointed, urgency in his voice. "We need to get to that rift." Her eyes followed his gaze, and for the first time, something softer flickered in her expression. Hope, or maybe desperation. Either way, it was enough. "Get us there, Spider-Man," she said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "We're not done yet." Peter nodded, his mind working quickly. He shot a web at the nearest creature, using its momentum to launch himself toward the rift. He swung high, narrowly avoiding the grasp of another monster. His heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Nyx was right behind him, her movements synchronized with his, her blade flashing as she cut down anything that got too close. They were almost there. The rift shimmered ahead, close enough to touch, but not close enough for comfort. One of the creatures reached out, its claws scraping against Peter's arm. Pain shot through him, but he pushed forward, summoning every ounce of strength he had. He was so close. Just a few more feet. The ground beneath them cracked open again, a massive creature emerging from the chasm, its mouth a gaping maw of teeth. It roared, shaking the very earth, and Peter felt his stomach drop. "Now," Nyx shouted, pulling him toward the rift. With one final leap, they dove through, the world around them spiraling into chaos. The rift swallowed them whole, the creatures' growls fading into nothing as they were pulled into the void. For a brief moment, everything was black. Then the sensation of falling stopped. The air was cooler, fresher, and as their feet hit the ground once more, the familiar sensation of safety washed over them. But even as the rift closed behind them, Peter knew that their battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The world around them was quieter now. The ground beneath their feet was soft, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and distant, unfamiliar flowers. A sharp contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. Peter's chest heaved, his breaths shallow but steady. The rift had taken them somewhere new, somewhere safe for now. But even as the world settled around them, the weight of everything they had just survived pressed down on him. He turned to Nyx. Her face was unreadable, her gaze locked on the horizon, where the faint outline of strange, towering structures rose against the glowing sky. The sun was setting, an unnatural shade of purple streaked with swirls of gold and pink. It felt wrong, as though they were standing in a dream that wasn't meant to be. "Is this it?" Peter asked, his voice softer now. Is this where we stop running? Nyx didn't answer immediately. She scanned the area, her sharp eyes moving over the landscape as if looking for something or someone. Her hand rested lightly on the weapon at her side, her posture tense, ready for any threat that might emerge. "We don't stop running," she said finally, her voice low, heavy with a truth Peter didn't want to hear. "Not yet." Peter's heart tightened. He stepped closer to her, his brow furrowing. "Then what are we doing here? If we can't stop running, what's the point of all this?" For a moment, Nyx seemed to hesitate. She was staring into the distance, her jaw clenched, as if the words she needed to say were tangled in her throat. Finally, she spoke, her voice so quiet that it was almost lost to the wind. "I don't know, Peter. I wish I did." There was a vulnerability in her words that shocked him. He'd seen her fight. He'd seen her eyes harden, her movements calculated and cold. But this was something else, a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the person she used to be before all of this, before Thanos, before the bloodshed. Peter's chest tightened. He didn't know how to respond to that. How could he? What could he say to someone who had been carrying the weight of her past for so long? "You're not alone," he said finally, his voice steady, as if to remind her. And himself of the truth. "We'll figure it out. Together." Nyx's gaze flickered to him, and for a moment, her walls seemed to soften. But the softness didn't last. She quickly turned her attention back to the strange landscape, her expression hardening again. She was pulling away. "I can't let anyone in," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I can't." Peter took a step toward her, his hand reaching out as though to break the distance between them. "You don't have to let me in, but you don't have to shut me out either. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Nyx didn't respond. Instead, she began walking forward, her steps quick, almost agitated. Peter followed, his feet silent against the soft earth. They moved in tense silence, their surroundings growing more alien with each passing step. The air was thick with the hum of unknown creatures, and strange, bioluminescent plants glowed in the dimming light, casting eerie shadows around them. The world seemed to pulse with energy, a living thing. Peter couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, waiting. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, his senses on high alert. He had no idea where they were or what kind of dangers lurked here, but he knew one thing for certain. This place wasn't safe. Not for them. "I've been to hell and back," Nyx said suddenly, her voice harsh, as though speaking to herself. "I've seen things you can't even imagine. I've made choices. I've done things. Terrible things." Peter's heart ached at the raw pain in her voice. He wanted to say something to comfort her, to remind her that she wasn't defined by her past, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was, he didn't have the answers. He didn't know what she had been through or what kind of burden she carried. They reached a clearing. The glow from the bioluminescent plants illuminated a large dark pool in the center, its surface smooth like glass, reflecting the colors of the sky. Peter couldn't help but feel drawn to it, the eerie calm of the water almost hypnotic. But Nyx didn't pause. She moved past it, heading toward the distant structures, her silhouette dark against the twilight sky. She was leading them toward something, but Peter had no idea what. His heart raced. They had to stop running eventually. They couldn't keep fleeing forever. But as he followed her into the shadows of the alien city ahead, Peter realized that wherever they were going, whatever was waiting for them there, it was a point of no return. And the price for survival might be higher than either of them was willing to pay. The city loomed ahead, an imposing structure of dark, alien stone that seemed to pulse with an energy all its own. The walls were covered in intricate symbols that flickered faintly, almost as if alive, their shapes shifting as Peter and Nyx approached. It was like nothing he had ever seen before, and it unsettled him. Nyx didn't stop as she neared the entrance. Her face was set, cold, as though she had steeled herself for what lay beyond. Peter, however, couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something they couldn't escape from. "Nix," he said, his voice low but firm. "What is this place? Where are we going?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stopped just in front of the massive archway that framed the entrance to the city, her hand resting on the stone. The glowing symbols above her head seemed to react to her presence, their glow intensifying for a brief moment before dimming again. "This is where it ends, Peter," Nix whispered, almost to herself. Her eyes were distant, staring into the darkness within the city. "This is where it started, and this is where it will all come to an end." Peter stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't understand, not fully, but he wasn't about to let her go through it alone. "Nix, you don't have to do this. Whatever you're facing, we'll face it together." His hand brushed against hers, a silent plea, a promise. Her eyes flickered to him, the faintest trace of emotion passing across her features, something like fear mixed with resolve. But it was gone just as quickly as it appeared. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is my burden, Peter. My father's legacy is mine to carry. It's the only thing that's been keeping me alive." Peter took a step back, the words stinging as they hit him. Her father's legacy. Thanos. The very name seemed to hang in the air between them, thick with everything they had been through. Everything they were running from. "No, it's not," Peter said, his voice rising, the urgency in his chest growing. "You don't have to carry that weight anymore. You can choose who you want to be, Nix. You can choose us." For the first time in what felt like forever, Nix looked at him, not with the coldness that had defined her, but with something softer, a flicker of doubt, of hesitation. It was as though, for a split second, she was considering what he was offering. But then she shook her head. "I've made my choice," she said, the finality in her tone cutting through him like a blade. "And it's too late to turn back." Peter felt his chest tighten, the words a punch to his gut. But he couldn't let go. Not now. Not when they were so close. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said, reaching for her again, his voice soft, but insistent. "We can be more than this. More than the things we've done. You're not your father, Nix. You're not a monster." She looked away, her eyes falling to the ground, as though the weight of her own shame was too much to bear. The silence stretched on, thick with unspoken emotions, until finally she spoke, her voice barely audible. "Maybe I am," she whispered. "Maybe I always will be." Peter's heart shattered at the words, but he refused to give up. "No, you're not. You're better than that." The ground beneath them trembled, and the massive city gates began to groan as they slowly opened. A wave of heat, unnatural and oppressive, spilled out, casting long shadows on the ground. From within, a dark figure emerged, tall, imposing, its presence commanding. Peter's breath caught in his throat as the figure stepped forward into the dim light. There, standing at the threshold of the city, was a silhouette Peter knew all too well, a face from his nightmares. It was Thanos. But this wasn't the Thanos he had fought before. This was a version of him, darker, more menacing, his eyes glowing with a terrible power. The very air around him seemed to crackle with his energy, as though the planet itself was trembling at his presence. Peter's fists clenched. "No," he muttered, taking a step forward. "We're not doing this." Nix turned to him then, her expression unreadable, but her eyes filled with something that made Peter's blood run cold. "This is it," she said, her voice breaking. "This is where it ends for me. For both of us." Peter reached for her, his heart racing. "No, Nix. Don't give up. You don't have to go back to him. You don't have to." But she pulled away, her face resolute. "It's my choice." And with that, she stepped forward, walking into the darkness of the city. Peter's heart stopped, a wave of helplessness crashing over him. He stood frozen, watching her disappear into the shadows. But he wasn't going to let her go, not without a fight. He took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. The battle wasn't over yet. And for her, he would burn through every shadow in the universe.